One of the nation's most fearless public servants who took on Daniel Andrews and the Victorian Public Servants is retiring this week. Victorian Ombudsman Deborah Glass has handed down a final report critiquing the response from governments and agencies to her recommendations. She sat down with my colleague, our Victorian political reporter, Simon Love.
Deborah Glass, thanks very much for joining Sky News for an exit interview.
My pleasure, Simon.
So after marking politicians and public servants and departments' homework for 10 years, do you think they've all listened?
I hope so. There's certainly evidence that quite a bit of listening has gone on, but there are areas that are, shall we say, a work in progress.
And could that be work in progress for the current Victorian government, say Jacinta Allan's government?
Absolutely. No, there is much that's left undone. I mean, there are some major reforms I proposed last year with my report into the politicisation of the public sector, and I really hope we're going to see some real reform in that area because we need it.
Jacinta Allan yesterday stated that the government's supported 95% of the recommendations you've put over the last 10 years about various issues. Is that enough though, or does that?
100% would have been good. 100% would have been good, but 95% is pretty good, and I am proud of that. But I mean, some of the ones that haven't been done represent some of the more important reforms that I would like to see in the state. Justice reform, whole of government reform to the justice sector, to make it less likely that people in prison are going to go back there. There's a lot that's still undone, and I hope that we will still see some change there.
And in your final report, you reveal that you only spoke to Daniel Andrews once as Premier and critiqued his government's lack of interest in justice reform, and also you talked about a legacy of fear. Is Daniel Andrews personally to blame?
Well, he was Premier for 9 of the 10 years I've been in the role as Ombudsman, and when we look at what happened back in 2014, the immediate departure of the head of the public service on the first day of his term of office, I don't think you can point the finger at anybody else.
Andrew Tongue, you're talking about the then head of the public service. When Chris Eccles came in though, did you get a fair hearing from him and or the Premier? You never met with Daniel Andrews in the job.
I didn't meet with Daniel Andrews. Now, to be fair, I don't, I'm not critical of that fact. One of the things you don't want to be as Ombudsman is cosy with the government of the day. So I mention it more as a curiosity than as a criticism. But it is a curiosity because people assumed that the Ombudsman and the Premier are constantly in contact, whether in conflict or otherwise, and that simply wasn't the case.
So your reports gained a lot of headlines, not just here in Victoria, but around the country, particularly for taking on the Andrews government or the Premier Andrews, particularly about unjust causes such as the public housing towers lockdown during the COVID pandemic and other issues. Are you proud of that impact you've had or scrutiny you've had, particularly on Daniel Andrews?
Well, I'm immensely proud of the work of the office, and you're right. I mean, it was the COVID years that really did, for better or worse, raise not only the profile of the office but the perception of conflict with the government, starting with the hard lockdown of the public housing towers, my recommendation that the government apologise to the 3,000 residents of the towers.
Which they haven't.
Never happened. But again, that's one of the... It's in the 5% of recommendations that wasn't accepted.
It's a big one, though.
It's a big one, but what also happens, and this is where actions speak louder than words, we also saw a year after that very high-profile lockdown, a year later, still in the COVID period, the towers were locked down again, but it was done very differently the second time.
Yeah.
So what I do find with my reports is that even when, on the face of it, governments give them no traction, actually they are improving the way they do their job, and that's really what matters.
Just quickly, arguably you're one of the nation's most fearless public servants. Would you have any advice to Commonwealth figures with our national audience, particularly with the NAC, the National Corruption Commission, starting up? What do you make?
I don't think the NAC needs any advice from me. I mean, but integrity officers, wherever you are, you need to not only be independent and fair, but seen to be so. And that's not a popular place, but it's a really important place to be.
Deborah Glass, appreciate your time over the years and thank you for joining Newsday.
My pleasure.